everybody. Thanks for tuning in. It's your weekly champ rotation. I'm your host, Peter Panic, and my co-host here, Mr. Manslaughter, as always.
Hello, as I always say.
And we have your Season 2, Week 4 champ rotation, and Cody and I both kind of agree. Not that great of a rotation this week, but we do what we can with it, and we're just going to roll with it. So we're going to jump right into the action like we always do, and we're going to hit you guys up with Ezreal. Yeah, he's a fun little champ, and mostly you would build him AD, but I'm not going to talk about the build right now. We're actually going to hand it right over to Mr. Manslaughter and let him talk a little bit about Ezreal's abilities.
Alright, so Ezreal, first thing you need to know about if you're going to play Ezreal is his passive. And if you hit a target with any of his abilities, it increases his attack speed by 10% for 6 seconds. And you can stack this up to 5 times. So that's 50% extra attack speed, which is basically like another Phantom Dancer, except for the crit. So the first ability you have is your Q, which is just a little thing called Mystic Shot. Has a really low cooldown, and it does physical damage, and it scales both off AP and AD. And it also applies all on-hit effects, like slows, red buffs, anything like that. And this is what you're going to level up first because it's your main damaging ability outside of your auto attacks. Arcane Shift, Essence Flux is your W, and it's mainly used on AP Ezreal, so I won't talk too much about it. But you want to get 1 point in it just so you can throw it off to keep your passive at a very high percentage. Arcane Shift is his E ability, and it's a flash ability that will shoot the nearest enemy unit when you teleport to that ability. It's the flash. And it also scales off magic, but you don't really use it for its damage. You use it for getting in and out really quickly. So combining this with like flash as a summoner spell gives him a ton of utility where you can go in and then flash right back out. And his ult is probably his most well-known ability. It's kind of like Lux's laser, where you just shoot it across the map, and it does a bunch of damage. But however many units it goes through, it actually scales down in damage. So you're mainly just going to want to try and last hit like a champion running away with it. There's a ton of damage, so it's good for that. And Dave is going to give you some insight onto his build.
Yeah, basically you're just going to build Ezreal as an AD player, but one item that's really good on him as opposed to other champs is Trinity Force, just because, like Cody says, you can build him AD and AP, and anything, Trinity Force is going to really buff him in a lot of areas that would make him stand out from most AD players.
Yeah, especially when you're getting up his passive, because you're going to be using so many abilities, you'll be proccing that Trinity Force time and time again.
Definitely that extra damage off of that Trinity Force is going to be viable. Alright, and going on to the next champ, we have Fiddlesticks, the Harbinger of Doom, or the Hairbringer of Doom, depending on what part of the country you're from.
Or the Harbinger of Doom.
That's right. I mean, you can also, doesn't really matter, but basically, Fiddlesticks, really great champ. And one great thing about Fiddlesticks is you can throw him in the jungle, you can put Fiddle in the middle, I mean, you can do all sorts of things with him, but basically, I'm going to talk today about his abilities. And I'm sure everyone that's played against him already knows he has a fear. It's a pretty good ability that he has. The range on it's decent, but the fear actually, as you level it up, increases in its duration. So you definitely want to get a point in that early, just so you can use it, but also might want to go different points and different abilities depending on if you're jungling and whatnot. Obviously, people know a lot about his drain because it usually happens directly after the fear, but the drain he's going to be stealing life from the target that he's doing, and he can do it on a enemy champion. He can also do it on a minion, and it scales AP. So you're going to want to obviously build him AP, which Cody's going to talk about a little bit later. Dark Wind is a lot of people call it a crow throw. And basically, it's a silent for 1.2 seconds each time it hits something, and it bounces off of 5 things. So kind of like Brand's ultimate, where you can cast on something that will bounce back and forth. It will bounce on 5 different things. Again, it can go between enemy champs, or it can go on minions. And Crow Storm, which is his ult, everybody I think has seen it, but it does a ton of damage. It scales also AP, just like actually has the same scaling as Drain, the 0.45 ability power per second, and then the maximum damage is 2.25 per ability power. So It's going to do a lot of damage, and honestly, the max damage, and that's obvious, that's for the max damage, but basically his ultimate does a lot of damage. So if he does his ult, you're going to want to make sure you stun him or CC him in some sort of way to try to get away from him, because he just does a lot of damage as an AoE. Also, it has a cast time. It takes 1.5 seconds for the channel, and then it flashes to the target location. The teleport, the little flash, it has a range of 800. So if you can crowd control him at any time that he's channeling, it's also a very good idea to do it. But Cody's going to go ahead and talk about his build a little bit.
Yeah, as Dave said, you're going to build him like an AP carry. But there are really two main items, besides like the obvious death cap, that you're going to want to get on him. The first of those items is Zanya's Hourglass, and that's because it gives him that little bit of extra armor to help him stay alive in teamfights. But also, after you use your ultimate, you can pop your Zanya's active, which puts you into an invulnerable stasis, but your ultimate will keep going on, so you're basically doing damage while you can't be targeted, and it's really good. And then also, an Abyssal Scepter is good on him, because it has a magic resistance debuff on nearby enemy champions, which goes along really well with your passive that does the same thing, but by 10. So that's 30 magic resistance gone from a lot of champions, and especially like on the carries, they only have like 20, 30 to begin with, so you're really taking them all the way down.
All right, moving on to the next champ, we have Galio, the Sentinel's Sorrow. This guy looks like a gargoyle, if you guys grew up in the 90s like I did. But Galio is one of those fun little melee support tank champs. You could kind of put him in the same category as like a Taric or something like that. Someone who's going to be tanky but also kind of helps people and uses melee. And Cody's going to go ahead and talk a little bit about Galio's abilities.
Alright, Galio is a little neat champ. He has a lot of skill shots, so if you like those, this is definitely a tank for you to play. His Q is a quick skill shot that's really easy to hit. It flies down vertically, so it won't hit anything until it gets to the target location. But it does magic damage and slows the impact area by 40% for 2.5 seconds. So decent crowd control. His W is a shield that he can put on an ally champion or himself, and it restores Galio's health each time the champion with a shield is hit. So it's pretty cool to put on yourself, because if you get hit, you get the health back, so it's kind of like they're not hitting you. His E ability is another skill shot that does a little bit of magic damage in a line in front of him, and it puts this little like draft up, as they call it, and if you walk on it or an ally walks on it for 5 seconds, it increases their movement speed by 52%. So that's really good. And then his ultimate is the main reason most people play Galio. I know I say this about every champ, but ultimate's kind of ultimate. Anyway, but he assumes the form of a statue. In other words, he stands still, and he taunts people around him for 2 seconds, and then does a ton of damage, and he blocks 50% of the incoming damage. So you can really tank their whole team. And then when he releases damage back, he does his own magic damage, 440 flat damage, and plus an additional 5% damage for each attack he suffered while channeling, and this maxes at 40%. But this is really good for starting team fights with, like flashing in, making sure you get like some carries in with it, and that will really change a team fight. And Dave is going to talk a bit about his build, which is kind of unique.
Yeah, Galio, the one thing about Galio is with his passive, he receives 50% of his total magic resistance as additional ability power on top of the ability power that's already built. So you want to build initially some kind of high armor, high health thing, kind of something like a Randuin's Omen, something like that. But then you want to go a lot of MR. And like Cody said earlier, you're going to mainly play Galio when he's playing against high magic dealing teams. So, a lot of good items. Like I said, the Randuin's Omen, and also Thornmail isn't bad. Again, it's high armor, and it's good because of that taunt, which is also very important. And, Abyssal Scepter is a really strong item on him because he's going to get that ability power and the magic resistance. So, build MR after you get a little bit of armor. And moving on to the next champ, we're going to go to another support-like character, more of a support than Galio, really, and it's Karma, the Enlightened One, and I think Cody and I both agree, one of the most underrated supports and maybe one of the most underrated champs in the game. Not a lot of people play her She's got some really great scaling. Cody's going to talk a little bit about her abilities, and I'm going to dive right into her build.
All right, so the first thing I need to mention about Karma is she has no ultimate. It's just an ability that she kind of has. You get it at level 1, you don't have to put a skill point into it. But when you use it, your next ability gets another effect called a mantra effect. So I'll be talking about each ability and its mantra effect as we go through. Alright, so our Q ability sends out a cone-shaped wave of damage, which scales off AP and does a decent amount of damage. But with a mantra bonus, this will heal allies in the cone for a good amount, plus 5% of their missing health. So if you're trying to heal someone who's low, especially like a tank or something, this becomes a ridiculous heal. So one of the most underrated heals in the game. I'm going to keep saying underrated this time. But on her next ability is her W, which creates a little anchor between her and either an allied or an enemy champ. And if it's an ally, it'll speed them up. And if it's an enemy, it'll slow them down. And each of these for 5 seconds. And the mantra bonus is simply that it either slows them or speeds them up for a greater amount. Her last usable ability is her E ability, which puts a protective shield around either herself or an ally champion. And this actually absorbs a ton of damage because it scales quite high with your AP. So you're going to want to use this on your carries and stuff. And also, if you use your mantra bonus on this, it does damage to units that get around the shield. So once again, putting it on a carry is great because when people are focusing them, they tend to be near them. And finally, her passive, really cool. She gains ability power as she gets lower with health. So, I mean, yes, you're going to heal up, but if you're all low and then you heal your team, you're going to be healing them for a lot more. So Dave is going to talk real quick about her support-like build.
Yeah, and basically, Karma, you're going to build her like you'd build a lot of the other supports, like Sona, Janna, but she's also kind of an assault support, similar to Lux, and so she's going to be able to do a little bit of damage as well. So just anything that's really going to be able to help you help your team. So things like Guardian Angel, anything with any kind of aura that's going to be able to give her a little bit of AP with some kind of armor and or like magic resistance. So anything like that, but you're just going to basically build her like you would build any other kind of support player. All right, moving on to the next champ. We've talked about her before. We'll talk about her again. We're going to talk about Katarina the Sinister Blade. Cody and I, like I said, talked about her. She's all right. She's not that great of a champ.
Last time we talked about her, was she nerfed with the Hextech nerf by then?
I don't know. I don't think she was at that point.
Okay, so if you don't know what we're talking about, they nerfed the attack damage on the Hextech Gunblade and made everything on it unique, so you can no longer stack them.
Yeah, I mean, we've like I said, Kat's in that, I don't know, bottom 10 champs in the game for me. She's just kind of useless. Her ultimate does a ton of damage, but problem is she can just be crowd controlled and she can't do anything about it. Cody, did you want to talk about her a little bit? Just kind of opinions. We're not really going to go into a whole lot about her.
Okay, let me say this. If you're still trying to play Kat, I really want you to reconsider playing her, because if you look at her ultimate, it scales more off attack damage than it does magic damage, whereas all her other abilities scale mostly magic damage. But her ult is where all her damage comes from. So you get stuck in the state of, do I build AP on her? Do I build AD? And the item that used to solve that problem was the Hextech. But now that they nerfed the Hextech quite a bit to where you can't stack them anymore, it becomes very hard for you to do a ton of damage and be worth it in fight. So I think me and Dave would both agree. We don't recommend playing her.
Don't play her.
Play a Kali.
Play a Kali. That's a perfect example. I was going to say, why play Kat when you could play a Kali? All right, moving on to the next champ. I'm getting goosebumps, little flutters in my stummy, because it's Nunu the Yeti Rider. I've been quoted many times talking about Nunu the Yeti Rider, and I always say Nunu the Yeti Rider. I rarely call him just Nunu, because a lot of people see the Yeti and they think, oh, that's Nunu. No, he's just riding. He's up top. He's on top. He's taking control of the situation. He's one of the best junglers in the game. One of the most overlooked junglers in the game. When I first started playing, this is like a nostalgic pick for me. It's like watching Full House on a Saturday morning, because it's one of the first champs I ever played. I think the first champ I ever bought, and absolutely love him. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about Nunu's abilities, and Cody's going to go and dive right into the builds, but I'm going to take precedence as we usually do the abilities first. And one great thing about Nunu, makes him a really great jungler, is his passive. It's Visionary, and basically after every 7 auto attacks, his next spell that he casts has 0 mana cost. So that's why he's really good in the jungle. And what's great is Visionary actually pairs really well with his W, and I'll get to there in a second. But his Q ability is Consume, and basically you're going to do true damage to a neutral minion or monster. You can't bite champs. If you could, he'd be one of the best champions in the game, but you can't bite champs. Basically, you do true damage, and you consume. You have health restored, and health restored actually scales at 1 ability power. So, really great. Now, I was talking about earlier, his Visionary pairs really well with his W attack, or his W ability. His W ability is called Blood Boil, and basically it's just a buff on attack speed and movement speed. So there's actually a point in the game around level 8 or 9, or if you have enough points in Blood Boil, you can Blood Boil, start attacking something, use Consume, keep attacking it, and hit Blood Boil again, and never use mana through the entire thing, except for on the very first Blood Boil, obviously, because you can actually hit it 14 times before Blood Boil will come back. So that's a really great thing to do, and you don't have to build into any kind of attack speed to do that. Also, Ice Blast. Cody, I know, is going to talk a little bit about this because I love the ability. I think it's one of the best poking abilities in the game. But basically, it just throws a little ball of ice out at somebody. It does magic damage, again, scaling at 1 AP, and it's going to do a slow from 20 to 60%, depending on the level, how much level you've leveled it up. Now, it has a high mana cost, like most things like this, like Vayne's Condemn or something like that. But it's one of the best poking items early game, especially because it does a flat amount of damage plus the ability power. It can actually end up doing a lot of damage. And everyone knows about Nunu's ultimate, Absolute Zero. Basically, he channels around him, and radius of AoE is 575, and that scales at a 2.5 ability power. One of the best scaling ultimates in the game. It also does base damage. Feasibly, if you have 200 or 300 AP build, you're going to be hitting someone with your ultimate around 2,000 magic damage with a full ultimate. Huge amount of damage. So one of the best junglers in the game. Like I said, he's also really good support lane bottom. The only problem with it really is only heals him on Consume, not the other champ with him in the game. And Cody's going to go ahead and talk a little bit about his build.
Alright, so Nunu, you're going to build him as a tankier character, but you're also going to get some AP on him, because like Dave said, that ultimate, you don't want to waste it, the damage on it. Scaling 2.5 on AP, that's just ridiculous. But one item you're going to need to build really early on him is a Banshee's Veil. And this is because his ultimate channels. You're going to be going into a team fight, be like, oh, I'm going to use this, and if you have a Banshee's Veil, they'll interrupt you instantly, and you won't do any damage. So this is his really only form of damage in team fights, so you're going to want to have that Banshee's Veil to actually do the damage.
And moving on to the next champ, we have Rammus, the Armadillo.
No, it's actually the Armadillo.
The Armadillo, I'm sorry, what a fool that I am. Now, this is I think the 3rd or 4th time he's come up in the rotation since we started doing this. So obviously Riot thinks that I don't actually know if that's true, but Riot thinks that he's worth playing. Let me tell you this, Cody and I play a lot of ranked games, even a lot of just normal draft games. And Rammus has been getting banned a lot because I don't think Cody will disagree. He's one of the best gankers in the game with some of his abilities. And, like I said, Rammus has been on the show a bunch over the past couple of weeks. So we're just going to talk about kind of playability with Rammus and some fun things that you can do. And I guess I'll start us off with, I talked about it in the past shows, but in case you're just tuning in for the first time this week, you want to kind of run flash on him if you're jungling with him, or if you're running him in lane. I wouldn't suggest that. You should probably just jungle with him. But basically, what you do is you use your Powerball, you're gaining speed, and then you flash into them. And it's really surprising the other team, and it's going to stun them and actually kind of knock them up for a second, which is, really great to do to initiate a team fight.
Yeah, and also this puts you directly in range for your taunt, which is probably the most complained about ability in the game right now. 3-second taunt is generally about the length of a team fight, and it has a ridiculously short cooldown. So you want to get this taunt off as early in the team fight as possible, which is obviously right when you gank, so you can use it again.
And all of Rammus' abilities actually all have really short cooldowns. Powerball's a 10-second, defensive ball curl's 14-second, puncturing taunt is a 12-second, and his ult, which does a ton of damage for a tank, is only a minute. Like, I've used it before just to clear minions. And like what Cody said about, using that taunt after that Powerball, one great item to build on him, and I think it's maybe the best item you can build on him, is Thornmail. Because it gives you a ton of armor, which is going to translate into the percentage of damage that's returned on whoever you taunt. So if you taunt like an AD carry, not only are they going to be getting magic damage from the Thornmail, but also from your defensive ball curl if you activate it. So you're going to melt an AD carry without ever attacking them, just by taunting them and putting on your shield. So get a Thornmail on them, definitely. Even if their AD carry is not doing that well, get a Thornmail on him because he's just really great champ.
One thing to be careful about though with him is you're going to build a Thornmail, and that's the 100 armor right there. And then your defensive ball curl gives you 150 armor. And if you haven't ever looked up the armor and magic resistance charts, basically what they show is that armor, it gives you diminishing returns, but after about the 200 to 250 point, it's so minimal that you're better off just building more health. So Thornmail is fantastic on him, but I wouldn't recommend building more armor. I would get like a Warmog behind it or something. So, Dave, do you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, especially because if it's going to start doing less damage, and Riot does that because you don't want anyone to be able to just kind of take over a game with someone like Rammus. But yeah, I would definitely agree with that because, you're going to have to build against some magic resistance as well, and Cody and I can just ask Cody, what's the best magic resistance item in the game?
Force of Nature.
Force of Nature, build it. If you're building a tank, build it. I don't care. Build it. And moving on to the next champ, we have Rise the Rogue Mage. And let me just tell you, in Rise champion description, Cody pointed this out to me earlier, it says that Rise is no longer just a mage. He has become a creature of magic itself. Which, do you need to say more? You know what I do need to say more is he's not that great. Not that great of a champ. We've talked about him before, and there's a lot of better AP carries to play. And Cody's going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the abilities, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about the build.
Alright, so Rise's Q ability is his main damaging ability. It scales off AP and his mana, so it does a ton of damage. It actually doesn't have much AP scaling, but the real part is that 8% of his maximum mana. So this is just a targetable spell, does a lot of damage. His W is a targetable snare. Again, not a skill shot, but it's also not a stun, so you need to be careful because enemies can attack you back. And it has decent AP scaling, and once again, scales 5% off his maximum mana. It's not his most damaging ability, but it's definitely still one that you need to use, obviously. His E ability is kind of like Fiddle's Crow that we talked about earlier in the show. It bounces 6 times and does magic damage each bounce, and it reduces the magic resistance of the target it hits by up to 24 for 5 seconds. So you're going to want to use this near the beginning of your combo in order to get maximum damage. And then Rise's ultimate is just like a boost in all his abilities type of thing. It gives him spell vamp and makes all his spells do 50% AoE damage. And also he gets an additional amount of mana, which helps his damage, again, because his abilities scale off mana. And this is really good to use in teamfight because it gives AoE damage to what normally would just be targetable spells. So they do more damage than most AoE spells would do. And finally, his passive is just when he casts a spell, all other spells have their cooldown reduced by 1 second. So with Rise's already short cooldowns, this can make it really effective for him to combo off a bunch of abilities in teamfight. Dave's going to talk a little bit about his build.
That's right, Cody, and I'm just going to jump right in. And basically, he's an AP carrier, so you're going to build him AP, but one thing you're definitely going to want to make sure you build on him is mana. I think Cody said it about 35 times. He really wants to get that in your head that if you're going to play Rise, build him with high mana. Really great items on him, Frozen Heart. Ton of mana in Frozen Heart. Also, Banshee's Veil, Rod of Ages, stuff like that. Tear of the Goddess, Archangel Staff, again, A lot of mana in these items, so you're going to want to build those up. But basically, other than that, you're going to want to build like a basic AP carry.
And one last thing about Rise is I know we said he's kind of a useless AP carry at the beginning, but he is good for counterpicking a couple of champs. I've learned this recently. You can use him to counterpick Kennen and LeBlanc because both these champs have really short cooldowns and are really bursty. And Rise's short cooldowns allow him to kind of match these champs pretty effectively. And neither of these champs have just a targetable quick stun, so Rise's snare is still very effective.
Yeah, trust me, if anybody knows how to play Rise, I think it's Cody. All right, moving on to the next champ, we have Teemo the Swift Scout, and apparently it's nostalgic week for Peter Panic because this is the second champ, or the first champ I played, and again, it's the second champ I ever purchased. Teemo, pretty good champ. Cody and I, we've talked about him before. I talked about making sure you use his abilities in conjuncture with your auto attack. But we'll go ahead and dive a little bit deeper into Teemo Swift Scout. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about the abilities, and we'll have Cody talk about the build. Anyways, basically, Teemo's passive, it's good. It's not great. It's definitely funny to use, especially if you're laning with a nice support. But basically, if Teemo stands still for 2 seconds and doesn't attack anything or anything, he's actually going to become stealth. And when he comes out of the stealth, and he's going to get a boost on his attack speed by 40% for 3 seconds. So, like I said, it's good if you can kind of sneak into a bush, go in biz, and then have some, I guess you wouldn't even have to sneak into a bush, just sneak somewhere, go in biz, and let somebody push up past you and pop out make sure you pop out at the right time, like they say in Wedding Crashers. So it's good for that, but other than that, it's not really that great. But it is good for making sure you hit that blinding dart on the other team's AD carry. And blinding dart, basically, you attack them, it does base magic damage, with scaling on AP at 0.8, but it actually has a blind duration where their auto attacks miss for a certain amount, and it's starting off at 1.5 seconds, going all the way up to 2.5 seconds. So really good to use for harass early lane on the AD carry, because if an AD carry wants to pop up to you and hit you once, you can just hit them with a blinding dart, and they can't really do anything about it because they're going to miss their next couple auto attacks, their next 2 for sure, depending on their attack speed. Move quick, basically. Guess what? You move quick. It just makes your movement speed buff up a little bit. It actually doubles as the passive, because there's a passive on it, and the passive scale goes 10, 14, 18, 22, 26, and it just doubles that when you activate it. Only for 3 seconds. I'll tell you, as this early game, it's not as much movement speed as you would think. You would feel like, I'm going to be able to get out of these sticky situations. Not really. You're going to want to get a couple points in that before you start using it to actually get away from people. Toxic Shot is his E ability, and it's straight, just passive. You don't actually have to turn it on or turn it off or anything. Basically, it does extra magic damage with his auto attacks, and they actually poison the person that you're auto attacking for 4 seconds. Now, it scales at 1.4, and that's per second. It does 1.4. It does 1.4 on hit and per second for the next 4 seconds. Now, Cody and I were actually talking about this before we started talking about the champs tonight. I think that he has horrible AP scaling. Cody believes that he has good AP scaling. Cody, would you like to talk a little bit about Toxic Shot?
Yeah, I've just always been under the presumption that Teemo has terrible AP scaling, so you'll see the 0.14. But if you really look at all his abilities, he has a 0.8 scaling on his Q ability, a 0.8 on his Mushroom, and 0.14 on his Toxic Shot. But this is applied 5 times. So 0.14 times the 5 times it hits is 0.7. So if you go look at someone like Annie's, she scales 0.7 on everything. And that's her 3 damaging abilities. This is 0.8, 0.7, and 0.8, which is actually higher than Annie's. Yes, it does it over time, but you could argue now, in my opinion, that building some AP on him is not a bad choice.
Yeah. The biggest thing with Teemo, and I've said in the past, I think the way that you would play him at this point, thinking about it more expansively, is you would build him like, obviously, we've always said Maladae's a good item on him. Nobody's arguing that. But build him like a Phantom Dancer and then maybe build him something with high AP, like something that maybe, I don't know if I go as bold to say something like a Rabadon's, but I mean that's not that outlandish. Like you could do something like that, knowing what we know now about how much AP is actually he's hitting for, and especially because his mushrooms which is his R ability, is his Noxious Trap. And it's just like a 10-minute ward you get to put on the map that if they walk over does a ton of damage. You could argue building him. The biggest thing is you're going to want to build attack speed and ability power. That's it. You don't want to build
Madrid's Blood Razor.
Madrid's Blood Razor is really great item on him. But you're going to want to, anything with attack speed and then AP. Like, that's really the way you want to go. And Cody's going to go ahead and talk about his build a little bit, even though I've kind of been harping on it.
Yeah, like Dave said, attack speed and ability power. A little bit of attack damage on the side, maybe. Stuff like a Gnasher's Tooth, a Madrid's Blood Razor. Frozen Mallet's really good on him because he doesn't have any sort of crowd control except for his blind, but that doesn't really help with chasing. So the Frozen Mallet giving that consistent slow is really helpful. And then like a Malady very early on in your build to get that good attack speed and ability power is very nice. And also the magic resistance debuff it puts on makes it so your poison isn't really stopped at all by magic resistance.
And moving on to the next champ, we have Warwick the Blood Hunter. Seriously, this guy's out for some blood. And Warwick's just really cool champ. I used to think he's one of the best junglers, and I'm sure that Cody and I are going to talk about that a little bit this week. And I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about Warwick's abilities, and Cody's going to talk about his build. And basically, Warwick's pretty easy to break down. His passive heals per attack, so he kind of has natural lifesteal in a sense. Also, moving on to his Q ability is another heal that scales at 1.0 ability power, and it's going to heal Warwick for 80% of the damage dealt, which is pretty nice, especially when you have a champion that's doing a lot of damage. Moving on to his W, that's actually just kind of like a Blood Boil from Nunu or Raise Morale from GP. It's just going to kind of increase that attack speed. And moving on to his E ability, it's Blood Scent, and basically it's a toggle on and off, and Blood Scent is just that little howl that you hear when you're playing with or against him, and it's just anybody that is under 50% life that's distance from him. And then, obviously, I think everyone knows what his ultimate is it's Infinite Duress, and basically it's just a suppress and does a lot of damage. And Cody's going to go ahead and talk a little bit about Warwick's build.
All right. One thing I'm going to quickly mention before I get really into his build is you'll notice about his Q ability that it says he strikes an enemy for the greater value between his damage plus ability power or up to 20% of the target's maximum health as magic damage. So a lot of people try and argue that Magewick is good, but really the 20% of the target's maximum health usually ends up being more than you can do in ability power. So it's kind of pointless to build a Magewick. But another mistake people make is building him straight damage. The thing with him is you're going to have to get in the middle of their team to use your ultimate. So you're going to want to add some tankiness to him. So items like Spirit Visage, since he has a bunch of healing abilities, is really good on him. A Sunfire Cape or anything with health and armor or magic resistance is good. And then an item with a lot of attack speed to trigger his passive. Like a Madrid's Blood Razor is really good, because you can actually take Baron extremely early with this item. Also, you're going to want to build either Mercury Treads or Berserker's Greaves on him, not cooldown boots as I've seen people do recently. You either want the attack speed for the passive or the Mercury Treads for the tenacity.
All right, and that's going to wrap us up for the week, but it's everyone's favorite segment this week, and I know it's been a goofy week, so thanks for sticking it out with us, but it's Who's the Champ to Play of the Week, and I'm going to take precedence over Cody. Usually I let Cody go first, but I feel like he's going to say the same thing that I am, so I'm going to take his thunder. I'm going to say you play Karma this week, because I think she's one of the most overlooked support players, and also there aren't enough support players out there. Cody, go.
I am going to say play Ezreal this week. Not for, one, because I want to prove Dave wrong, not that I was going to say Karma. I actually was, but Ezreal, not because he's necessarily a great champ. He's just fun to play. You flash around a bunch, use some crazy abilities. He's very strong in lane early on, so you don't got to worry about getting beat around. So have fun this week. It's not a very good rotation, so if you're just looking to play him.
All right, that's going to wrap us up. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and you guys have a great week.